Two special guests to speak to you. One is Dr. Herbert Elmer Gooch of California, a professor of political science at CLU. I only did that to harass you. In Thousand Oaks. Dr. Gooch has been interviewed extensively by both print and broadcast media. Dr. Gooch is a friend of Dr. Beverly Kelly and John Sharkey. I'd also would like to mention that all of the current City Council people have spoken at the museum, but I would like to specifically mention John Sharkey. John, who will be stepping down as a City Councilman this year, has served our community for over 24 years.
Wow.
John has been a regular attending speakers speaking at the museum. John has helped the museum in ways most people don't know. I will give a few examples of what he's doing helping the museum. The museum, he's taught me how to understand city procedures. He's filmed events that have taken place, for example, even right now. He plays the piano like a saloon keeper's piano player. And he entertains visitors coming in. He does computer setup when Dr. Pi is visiting one of his girlfriends. And he helps clean up the museum. And above all, he helps Beverly Kelly put out information and publicity in the area. And these are just to name just a few that I came up with about John. And I appreciate Dr. Gooch for speaking, and John also, that this will be very enjoyable. And the one piece of housekeeping I'd like to do is I put the schedule of all the speakers coming up that are on the chairs. And then I'd also like to mention a free event at the BFW today from 1 o'clock till 6 o'clock p.m. They're going to have music, food, and kids' activities. So if you have any questions, you see the fellow with all the BFW, the hat and the shirt on, and you can ask Penn, and he'll be more than willing to answer any questions. With that, I'll turn it over to you two gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So who's going to go first?
Well,
Just Herb here, for those who don't know, runs the Master Public Administration program at Cal Lutheran University and has been commenting on Ventura County politics for years and years. He's probably the most quoted man in Ventura County, and he knows where a lot of bodies are buried. Now, Larry promises to be enjoyable, so just think of us as the Sunshine Boys.
oh, I love it. Which am I? One little correction though, on May 31st, I joined Beverly. I retired. Whereupon
Yay! Now he's going to work harder than ever.
What I found is that sort of like being czar of all the Russians after the revolution. You got a title, but good luck. I have known John for, let's just put it in decades, whom I fortunately met through Beverly Kelly when she was actually head of the communications department at CLU. So we became friends even before John came onto the scene, and then we were, both of us, mostly Beverly, most of us were absolutely delighted with John. So the familiarity goes back a long time. As John mentioned, I've covered a lot of politics in this area, so that was kind of added frosting on the cake, not only getting to know John, but also watching him as a political figure in this area. Maybe what we ought to do is start back and ask John where he came from, since he is not native to this area. So for those of you who don't know, just get a little of his background, and we'll begin to look at some politics and some things I think you're going to find kind of interesting. So, where'd you come from? how did you get here?
Oh, that's the question. Yeah, for those who can't tell, you know, I came from the East Coast, but I grew up about 20 miles south of Boston.
Twang?
I was just back there last spring, and when I go back, I do speak the native language, and it kind of sticks with me a little bit. You know, the story I like to tell is when I was about 3 years old, the 1952 elections. We lived in a town called Bridgewater, and Rich knows where that is. And the city hall in Bridgewater is like a 200-year-old white clapboard building. And I remember going with my folks. This is one of my earliest memories. I was just toddling along. Remember going with my folks on election night. They were going to vote for Adlai Stevenson. And in those days, the town clerk on special occasions wore this long frock coat. I just remember this guy in a long frock coat, and there was a turnstile he would open, he'd check off your name and go in. And my folks said, "Here, you wait with Mr. Smith, and you know, we'll be right back." And they went behind his curtain, and I what are they doing? And I just couldn't wait. So the next opportunity I had, I ran under the gate and into the booth where my folks were, because I had to see what they were doing. So that's my first election was 1952.
Do we need some microphone for
We
that?
do need some microphone, yeah. Oh, is that more? That's okay. Yeah, I try to enunciate. There's you know, Beverly will tell you this. You know, there's a thing called the Cape Cod Mumble, and I lived down the Cape for quite a while. And you'd have these conversations where guys would go like, "Oh, there's someone's going there. What do you think of that?" You know, so even though that is my natural proclivity, I'll try to enunciate a little bit, and you know, hope you can hear this. But when you're in Massachusetts and you're near Boston, politics comes in, you know, just behind the Red Sox and Bruins and maybe ahead of the Celtics. So it was always there. You know, I was, you know, as I was thinking, what am I going to say today? And I have no idea. Neither one of us knows what we're going to say today. So this is let's hope it's kind of amusing. I was thinking back to 1976. In the presidential primary, I was the precinct captain for Senator Fred Harris in Massachusetts. And by the way, Barney Frank was our state chairman that year. And I can tell you a story about him. There's a lot of stories about Barney. And Fred would talk, one of his stump speeches, he would talk about growing up in Oklahoma in a family that revered Franklin Roosevelt. And I was thinking, I grew up in a family also that revered Franklin Roosevelt. It was a tough time during the Depression. My grandmother was a single mom with 3 little kids at home who was scrubbing people's floors for a living, trying to pay the bills. And the New Deal meant a lot to them. There was food to eat. My uncle was old enough to work with a Civilian Conservation Corps, make a few bucks. And when you think of the legacy of the New Deal, and we're in a different era now, we all know that. When you think of the legacy of the New Deal, it wasn't just FDR's programs. It wasn't just the structure that was given to this country. It was the generation that grew up and appreciated everything that the New Deal did, and it was the children of that generation. Now, one of my good friends, Rick Wall, who writes for the Hueneme Pilot, I invite you to check that out. He says, well, the baby boomers turned out to be one of the most conservative generations since the 1920s, and that's probably true. But a lot of us grew up with an ethic that things could be better, that progress was possible. And one of those seminal moments, thinking back, I'm at that age when we look back and say, well, my goodness, how did we get here? What did we do? how many steps did we take? Boy, that's a long way back down that hill. I recall the John F. Kennedy's inauguration. Now, he was a Massachusetts guy, of course. It was a snowy day. It snowed that morning. And it snowed the day before in Washington. It was really cold. And my dad and I were out shoveling the driveway in the morning. And on those snow days, my mom always made a grilled cheese sandwich and tomato soup. And we came in and we watched that inaugural on a black and white TV. And Jack Kennedy was there, you know, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. And you think about that now, and this sounds kind of corny, doesn't it? I mean, you know, we're in kind of a cynical age. You know, my goodness, you know, it's all about me, isn't it?
Okay, but it's not politics that's brought you here. What actually brought you to California?
Okay, I graduated in 1971 right into a recession, and spent 3 years driving a taxi in Hyannis.
Tell them the story.
Which story?
The story of the kid coming home.
Oh. I was down at the bus station waiting for the midnight bus to come in, and across from the bus station was a used car lot, and it was pretty quiet in Hyannis at midnight. It's not really a lively town. And this kind of scruffy, long-haired guy with a gym bag full of dirty clothes comes out from the used car lot side and collapses into the cab and says, I said, where are you going? He says, I'm taking Hyannis Port. I said, where are you going down there? He said, I'll show you. So anyway, we go up there. We go to the Kennedy compound, and we go to Rose's house. This is young Joe Kennedy. Congressman Kennedy, who's now not the guy you've been seeing lately from Massachusetts. This is the guy who was the congressman from Rhode Island. And he didn't go to his parents' house. He went to his grandmother's house. And he goes up to, he says, wait a minute, I have to get the money. It was like $2. And so he goes up and he knocks on the door, and Rose comes to the door in her bathrobe and gets her purse and gets the money. So, yeah, it was kind of interesting. Another story, when, if you remember the McGovern campaign, McGovern-Eagleton, and there's a lot of things went wrong with that campaign, but Eagleton, of course, was revealed had mental health issues, so they decided to bump him off the ticket. And the choice, McGovern's choice, was Sergeant Shriver, who was also in the Kennedy family and down at the compound. And I wasn't working that day, but I know the guy who did this job. A call came into the cab stand, and they said, you have to deliver a personal message. It has to go to Sergeant Shriver. It can't go to anybody else. And he says, okay, what is it? This is Frank Mankiewicz, the campaign manager. He says, you tell Sergeant Shriver the man is trying to get a hold of him. Okay, so Jack Snyder, it's this crusty old guy, goes down there to the compound, and he goes, knocks on the door, he says, I have a message for Shriver, and he said, I have to deliver it in person, and all this. They go, okay, so finally they bring him back. Sergeant Shriver's by the swimming pool with a cocktail in his hand, sitting in the sun, and Jack Snyder goes up and he says, I have a message, sir. The man is trying to get a hold of you. And Shriver looks at him and says, what the hell does he want now? So anyway, how I came to California. 1976, my dad worked for a company called United Shoe Machinery Corporation. He was in industrial sales. At one time, they were one of the largest companies in the country. They provided every piece of manufacturing equipment in every shoe factory in the country. That business, of course, was drifting overseas. That company was bought out by a conglomerate, and somehow everybody that was in the sales department that was over 50 years old got laid off. Don't know why. that's how they did it. And my aunt and uncle had already been in Phoenix. And so my folks said, well, hey, let's go to Phoenix, you know. And things weren't going too good, and I wasn't doing much, and said, okay, except I'd already been to Phoenix. I'm not a guy that likes the desert, but I had been a musician. I had worked in you know, the music field a bit, and I had some cousins named Dick and Don Idrissi, who wrote a song called "Never My Love." You may have heard it. And I said, well, shoot, let's go to LA and I'll be a rock and roll star. Now you have to understand, I already tried this before with my friend Rolf Anderson, who was later in a band called Human Sexual Response, and was one of the writers on a song called "I Want to Be Jackie Onassis," which was kind of a hit, if you ever heard that song. And we went to Kansas City, and that didn't work at all. Have been back to Kansas City since. The city's changed a lot, much for the better. But anyway, so we said, okay, shoot, let's go to LA and be rock and roll stars. And I never really did quite hook up with my cousins, but
What year would
this would be 1976. We were leaving Massachusetts just as the tall ships fleet was sailing into Boston Harbor. I was driving a U-Haul truck, towing my car behind it. And as a lot of people do, you come to LA, you come to California, and you say, well, let's give it a couple years and see how it goes. And a couple years go by, well, it's not too bad, let's give it a couple more years. And here we are, 40 odd years later, and I think things have gone pretty well.
It couldn't have been the drugs and Pretty Women. Not John. No.
You know, the band I was in, we attracted a lot of guys with like slide rules and pocket protectors. I mean, I kept waiting for the girls, but you know, I don't know what happened there. And you know, the reason how I got to Port Hueneme was we were living in North Hollywood in a mobile home in a trailer park that was between a fiberglass shop and a sheet metal factory, right under the short approach to Burbank Airport. So we got a great view of the planes flying right overhead every day, several times a day. And we'd saved up enough money at that time, and I was looking for a place to buy that I could afford, and things were still expensive, and I was looking further and further out of town. I was looking at Lancaster, I was looking at Palmdale. I said, I don't like it here. If I'm going to be an hour out of town, where can I be? And I took out a map that said, oh, Oxnard. And I've never been there before, but it's on the water. And in Van Nuys, there was a newspaper stand that sold out-of-town newspapers, and I bought a copy of the Oxnard Press Courier, and I looked at the prices and said, my goodness, I can afford this. And so I started out, the first house I bought was a small two-bedroom house over on A Street, right over here. And it was the only place in Southern California where I could afford a house where I could walk to the beach. And I'll tell you, it's still the best bargain in real estate in Southern California. That has not changed. This is just, you know, if you want to be near the beach, this is the place to be. You can actually afford to live there. It's one of the few places left where that's true. You know, so that's how I got out here.
All right. What were you doing during this period? How did you earn enough money to have any food? What were you doing?
Oh, well, I lost a lot of weight. The joke I tell is I've found every possible way to lose money in the music business. Yeah, I was a player. I was a partner in a punk rock record label. I tried being a concert promoter, which is really, don't do that. You know, that's how you make a small fortune. You know that joke. But mostly I worked for a production company called Ron Rubin Productions. And we did conventions, trade shows, weddings, bar mitzvahs, birthdays, you name it. And it was at one time the biggest office in LA. And I was the production manager. I was the guy that hired all the musicians. I was the guy that hired all the contractors and put the events together and make sure everybody was there on time and did all that. And I remember one of my friends from out of town was visiting and said, "Oh, I'd like to meet someone in show business." And I said, "Well, I'm in show business." And she says, "You work in an office." And I said, "Well, most people in show business work in an office." So that was so I was basically commuting back and forth, and then in the early '90s, things there was some rough times, and the work was dying off. But at that time also, and this is where we get into how we get into the politics here. In the early '90s, there were some issues in the city. Now, those of you who are here may remember this. I don't know if you remember the view tax or the RV park. There were a couple issues that were stirring up the populace, if you will, and they're issues that are still with us. I mean, they're about how do you raise revenue? What's a fair way to do that? The view tax was a property tax override that was based on how close you were to the beach, and it never struck me as being very fair. And of course, the folks that lived at the beach didn't think it was fair at all. And as it turns out, the Supreme Court of California said you can't even do that; it's not even legal. So when we get to contemporary times in D.C., well, why don't we do a parcel tax? Well, let's think about that, because we've already been told you can't exactly do that kind of a tax. And there was, at the east end of the beach right now, which is still a vacant lot, there was a proposal for a city-owned RV park. And folks that lived there didn't like it. And there was also some issues with things like snowy plovers and tidewater gobies and, lease turns, and there are mountains of environmental problems and issues you'd have to deal with. And it didn't, I had problems with that. I had problems with the idea of what's appropriate for a government to own as a business. And if it's such a good idea, how come we didn't have any private operators knocking on our door saying, "I want to do that"? So there were in 1992, Tony Young was elected, and then I got involved with the community group at that time because I had the time to do it, and I thought, since I had a background in promotion and advertising, I said, I'll run a campaign. I'll be James Carville, and let's find a candidate. And then people started saying, "Hey, John, why don't you run? Why don't you run?" And I said, "Well, I'm supposed to be so smart. Why don't I run?" And I did. And lo and behold, I actually won, and along with Bob Turner, you may remember, who was our town dentist at the time, and he and I were on one side, and then Tony Volante was on the other side. We had, in the space of 2 elections, there were 4 new people on the council, and Norby Carpenter was the last link to what had happened before.
So this had to be about 94,
1994. And it was the guy that was, I can't call him a campaign manager, but he was my advisor certainly. After the election, he said, I never thought you were going to win. Yeah, there were 13 people running that year, and so at that point you're trying to, how do I stand out from the pack? And it was I'll tell you, there have been times of acrimony and times of peace, and this was a time of acrimony. We had a candidate who had his tires slashed. I think they thought it was mine. We each had a white pickup truck, and I think they thought it was mine, but. There were like nasty phone calls at 2 o'clock in the morning, and it was really, really ugly. And out of that, we managed to forge an alliance, because the great thing about local government for me is that it's not a partisan thing. And you know, Governor Johnson back at the turn of the last century gave us this nonpartisan system of local government. Because what is the left or right position on, you know, fixing the sewer system or, you know, sweeping the streets? It's about practical problem solving. And there's a lot of, you know, there've been, I mean, lately some people have poo-pooed this, you know, and because everything is now partisan and adversarial. But at its best, the city council is a team. I mean, it's that old saying, you know, it's not the name on the back of the shirt that counts, it's the name on the front of the shirt. And, you know, I've had some knockdown, drag-out fights with people, you know, over the years, but in the end, I think we were all trying to work for the benefit of the city. And, you know, that election, you know, Tony Volante and I, you know, we got into, you know, the candidate forum, we got into a big dispute, and, but we became good friends.
It is like a cry.
No, I'm sorry. Politics ain't beat that. And we worked for the benefit of the city, and I think that's an important notion to have. Is that you know, you don't have to be friends, but maybe, or you don't even have to agree, but you should respect that everyone is there because they have a notion of what they want to do, and they're representing the people that voted for them. And you know, I mean, you know, you know, the cynicism we see every day in politics. Oh, you know, they're all crooks. They're all trying to put one over on people. You've known a lot of people around this county for a long time. I have too. I can't say I've known everybody, but I've known a lot of the folks that have been in elective office and worked at staff at the city level and at the county level and even at the state level. And I will say that, you know, it's like any other job. Some people are better at their job than others, but most everybody that's here is here for the right reason, because they're trying to do, they have an idea of what they want to do that's good. They're not, and they're doing the best they can. So it's really hard when I see some of the criticism that comes down, because it's not fair. And there used to be boundaries and rules, and you know, the last few years we've gotten to a situation where, oh well, I'll tell you know, I can go after your family because you got elected, and your family's, you know, your wife, your husband, well, they're with you, so we can attack them too. No, I'm sorry. There's got to be some sense of limits and some sense of respect. Otherwise, it's just a personal fight, and nothing will get done, and nothing will move forward. This is a tough time. This is a tough time. A lot of what you see at the national level is filtered down to the local level. It didn't used to be that way, but it is now. You know, I think there are better agents of our nature, and we need to encourage them.
I was going to say, one of the things that, God, I hate to do this to give him, he's an old friend of mine, I hate to give him a compliment, but one of the things that was really nice about John was that he when he would talk about things, he'd do his homework. And I can't tell you how many well-intentioned people in politics just, damn it, don't do their homework. John would always developed an expertise in certain areas, and coming out of the concerns of Port Hueneme, like sand, sanitation, things that don't usually excite people very much. You've got one of the people who knows the most in the entire state about certain issues, and that's refreshing. What John is also referring to is politics seems to go in cycles, and where I live near Thousand Oaks 10 years ago, I mean, we had pitched battles. the council meetings would last until 2 and 3 in the morning. I mean, it was unbelievable. But now it's been, sort of smoothed out. When John started into politics in the 90s, and that's why I was trying to get him to identify at the time, there was pretty much of a rough patch. Now he's leaving and you've just gone through another rough patch. What I also appreciated with John was that he always, what they say, crossed the aisle. He didn't care if you were Republican or Democrat, liberal or conservative. He tended to talk issues. And his approach to politics, and I think it's the right one in particular at the local level, is problem solving. There's not a Republican and a Democrat way to pave the damn streets. And that's how he earned his respect, I think, in kind of the, how would you say, the political class in Ventura County, those who spend a lot of time worrying about this stuff, and also the politicians. And I mean, coming down from, I was talking with Eldon Galloway, conservative Republican, used to be the congressman. He knows John. They could come up and ideologically might be 180 degrees apart. But when it came to looking at something that affected Ventura County, hey, two of them could cooperate. That's a little bit in short supply now. But here's something I wanted to ask you. Your background, and a great deal of it, is music, and he's being kind of modest because he's a damn good piano player, composer, etc. What's the parallel between music and politics?
Politics is rock and roll by other means. Now you see why I asked him to be here.
I'll think of
you,
it.
you make me blush her, Elton, boy, we would jab each other something fierce. There's a couple aspects that question. I mean, one is there's a certain musical meritocracy. I mean, if you can play, can you play or not? I mean, if you can play, well, you're in the band. If you can't, I remember a story of a guy that became a relatively famous bass player at the time. He was just a kid. He got invited into the band, and we got 2 bars into the chart. Things wrecked, and I just turned around. I was talking to the singer, and the next thing I knew, a couple of guys had picked up all of his equipment and just moved it out the door. It's a little slower in politics. It's kind of up to the people to see that, but it's at some level. It's an interesting conundrum, and I've been thinking about this too, because normal people don't run for office. Another music story. I was Owen Green was a bass player I worked with one time, and we're getting ready to start playing, and he just kind of walked over to me and he said, "Did you ever consider the amount of ego it takes to stand on a stage and expect somebody to pay to watch you do it?" And then he walked back. And it's the same thing. I mean, consider the amount of ego it takes to put your name on a ballot and ask people to vote for you, or ask them to give you money, which I'm not good at. And we can talk about my assembly race if you want. So there's that kind of a personality thing, and here's a secret about politicians. All politicians want to be liked. You walk into a room full of politicians, and they all want you to like them somehow, because that's why you vote for them. So there's that personality thing. Now, different politicians are better one-on-one. Some people are better at giving speeches. Or I mentioned Barney Frank, and I met him years later, and I said, "Oh, hi, I'm John Sharkey. I was a precinct captain when you were the chair of the Fred Harris campaign." And he went, "Oh, yes." On the other hand, guys like Dana Rohrabacher, who we've all heard in the news lately and who I disagree with, except, I will say he's done a lot for coastal issues. He's a surfer. He really loves the coast, and I'll give him credit for that. But, you meet a guy like that, and, we just had a rip-roaring conversation, and he was a great guy to talk to one-on-one. So, there's different personalities, people do it for different reasons. You know, it was one of my early supporters, you know, we did a fundraiser and they put a band together, we were playing. She says, "Oh, you're so good at just bringing people together and having them make beautiful music." And I said, "Oh, okay, you know, I'll take that." And yeah, it's kind of like that. Or city council, interesting enough, with 5 people, always reminds me of a basketball team. You know, and hopefully we come at it with different skills and different interests, and nobody's getting in anybody else's way, because we'll take on, you know, I mean, I'm really big on the beach and the public works side of things. That's you know, where my interest is, and other people are more interested in social issues. But if you're working well together, you're passing the ball around, and everybody gets to take a shot. You know, it works that way. It works that way.
I was struck by John, you know, he was talking about one of the characteristics of a politician is like a musician or an actor. You know, there's a reason, ego, why you want to be, you know, front and center all the time. Relevant to national politics too, but you know, one of the characteristics of the people I've seen that I've respected in politics is they also have the courage to be unpopular, and that's a tough one. And John's taken his lumps, but he's been willing to do that. Because you get people that are just constant, they just tell you whatever the hell they want. And one of the things that's been nice about John is
Brutally honest.
Yeah, he can be brutally honest, but it's that courage also to be unpopular, and that is a really hard thing to develop. Let me ask the question of when you've come into politics in the 90s to now you're leaving, you know, the elected public scene, you're not going to leave politics entirely. What's been the biggest single shift in the problems that Fort Hueneme faces?
Wow. There are certain structural issues that we were given at our inception. In 1948, the structure of municipal finance is different than it is now. And what I've often said, if we try to incorporate this city today, LAFCO would probably not let us do it. Because a couple things have changed. Originally, cities, as they are in a lot of other parts of the country, rely a lot on property tax. When Prop 13 passed, one of the things it did was transfer property tax from being a local tax to being a state tax. The money goes to the state and they send it back. We get 17 cents on a dollar for every property tax dollar. Now that's actually high. That's actually high because cities like Camarillo get 6 cents. But what Prop 13 did, and what it meant that cities had to rely on other means of revenue. So Camarillo on the freeway has an outlet mall that generates piles of sales tax, or if you have an auto mall, sales tax has become the name of the game. Port Hueneme can't play that game. We don't have freeway access. We don't have any land. You know, where would you put a big box store here? Where would you put an auto mall? So that's not going to happen for us. So that was a big shift in the 70s. And then a couple things happened in 2008 and soon thereafter, the recession, which meant our investments went from 3 to 5%, whatever we were getting on return on a basic investment, down to 1%. Okay, well that's a hit to your revenue there. Sales tax, what we get of it is gone down. All your revenue streams went down, just like everybody else's in the recession. But then the state was in such a fix that they worked this so-called triple flip with the states, locals, and the school districts and all that. And one part of that was doing away with the redevelopment agencies. And there's more complexity there, and I think the League of Cities really booted it, but that's another story. But overnight, the city lost $4 million, basically, is the bottom line on that. And so, in the last 6 to 8 years, we've been in a deficit situation. It's been we were put there because the city was designed to work a certain way, and the rules under which it was operating were changed. So we've got to do different things. We had 4 years ago, we tried to update the business license ordinance, which dates to 1978. We've got big defense contractors, on the base that aren't paying anything. We've got, the guy running the dry cleaners or the Chinese restaurants paying hundreds of dollars a year. It's way out of balance. We ran into some opposition on that from our friends at the Harbor District. They got $1 million campaign running against it, and the measure was defeated. We've had some issues on the council that we should have capitalized somewhere along the line for other revenue measures. But we didn't. And this year we have Measure U, which is a sales tax increase. I certainly support it because when it comes to that kind of revenue thing, I'm all of the above. It's not. We have a council member that's wanted a parcel tax, which is hard to pass. But okay, fine. If that's what we could get, I would support that. But the council wasn't interested in doing that. Now, the easiest measure we have is the sales tax measure. It's more likely to pass. It's understandable to people. It spreads out the cost for not just residents, not just homeowners, but people that are visiting, that sort of thing. So yeah, the revenue side is always a challenge here. We've cut all expenses we can. We don't have a lot of expenses to start with. So that's, we've always been faced with this city, particularly since the Prop 13 days, with that balance of revenue and expense. So the other thing, maybe you may have read, may have heard, may be involved. The cannabis industry. I don't look at that as a golden goose necessarily. I mean, it's a business that's coming to town and it's good. We've got one business and we're getting $10,000 a month. Well, okay, that's nice. Will that go on? I don't know. If Oxnard gets up and ramped and it becomes a big business over there, what's that going to mean for our local businesses here? I don't know. So I'm not counting on that, and that alone will not solve our problems. We still need to have other revenue items. And so I think it's important for us to keep looking at the options that are out there and asking the voters to do this. Because it's, in California, the voters get the choice. And you get to a point where you run out of other options, and people need to understand that. And if you don't want to support increased revenues, then I don't know what that means in terms of cuts anymore, because there's not a whole lot more you can cut. So that's we're in a structural situation.
So you would describe yourself as maybe politically optimistic. I mean, council is changing, and there's the huge, just got over a real rough period of instability. But economically, you're not so happy because you see there's few places to cut costs and there's few places to bring in new revenue. The other complicating factor, of course, is the base and what our future may hold there. But before we sort of turn it over and see if we get some questions from you guys, how do you see yourself in retirement?
Well, okay. Let's. I'll start there, and I'll work backwards and pat myself on the back a little bit too. Yeah, I'm going to go back to being a piano player. I'm going to do more recording, and because I can do it now. It's just I can afford it. Thank goodness. I don't look for many shows. I did a show last year. I might do another one sometime, but You can find my stuff on iTunes and Spotify and all that if you really want to look. So I'll be doing that, and also the Hueneme Pilot, which is a newspaper I took over from. Lauren Lewis, you may recall, was here, was a good friend of ours. Actually revived the pilot as a print version, and I do it as an email version. It's a subscription thing, so give me your email and I'll put you on the list. And I try to cover local stuff. I'll be able to cover more local stuff because I've never covered the city council before. So I'll be doing that sort of thing, and we're going to just do more traveling and have fun while we still can. Things get harder all the time, as you get older.
I've noticed.
Now's the time to sum up and look back, and and you didn't ask me all the great things that I've done. So, just looking chronologically at kind of what's happened was the city charter. I knocked on 6,000 doors to get that passed. Had a hand in that. It's something I wanted to do back when I was first elected. We managed to get it done, and we had a committee, and Doral Wright was on that committee, and Ted Waddell was on that committee, and a few other people. And the brilliance of our city charter is that it's simple. It basically says we're a charter city, and the ordinance is going to be passed by the city council. Oxnard tried to do it at the same time. They had a 50-member committee. They couldn't get anything done. They couldn't get it written. We kept ours simple, and we are a charter city, which doesn't mean as much as it used to do, because the state keeps taking powers away from us, but it helps us a little bit. So, it's always nice to say, hey, I passed the city charter, some of the other things, rebuilding the sewer system. We went up to the Department of Commerce up in Seattle and led a delegation up there, and we got some help from the feds. We rebuilt our sewer system, and we were saving up in our reserve funds for the potable water system as well, which needs to be done for these city council candidates out there. We really need to get to work and rebuild the potable water system. Now, unfortunately, with the recession and all that, the money we've been saving up, we had to spend for operations. So there was a lot of criticism. You had $23 million in your reserve fund, and now it's $16 million. Well, let's give some credit to the folks that built up that reserve in the first place. And it's a damn good thing we did. It's a good thing we had that kind of reserve, because it got us through the worst of the recession. And then finally, and also, of course, you mentioned, worked on beach replenishment. A lot of people don't understand that. That's a federal issue. We are not actually the project. The project is actually the Channel Islands Harbor. So we just kind of ride along as the beneficiary. And I give a lot of credit to Julia Brownlee's office for doing a wonderful job of trying to get us back on track on that. I've worked as hard on that as anything. And then something people may not be aware of is I've been on the Regional Sanitation District Board for all these years, and the Toland Road landfill, which is where our solid waste goes, our trash goes there, is the only publicly owned landfill in the county. And I went up to Sacramento to the waste board along with Judy Lazar from Thousand Oaks, and work that through the permit process, through the county permit process, and we're now looking for an extension on the permit from the county, and we're getting good support from the Board of Supervisors and even the neighbors right now. And that's one of the things I probably take the most pride in, is that landfill. It's I'm the dump guy, I guess, but it's one of those things that are really critically important to the folks in this city and the folks that are in this county. And a lot of times you do things and people don't know you did it. That's okay, because we all should be humble. We talk about the ego, but I think the best politicians are humble, and I'm not too proud to brag, but at the same time I recognize that nothing we do alone. It's all because we got staff behind us, we got council behind us, we got people in other cities and up and down the county, and These things happen because everybody does a little bit of work. It's hardly anybody. If somebody tells you they did it all themselves, no, that didn't happen.
All right, how about regrets? Any regrets you leave?
The only wasted experience is the one from which we learned nothing. Running for state assembly wasn't probably the best idea. The story about that, when I was young, I had a job as a telephone solicitor, which I lasted for maybe 1 week, and I said I was never ever going to do this again. And then I was running for assembly, and I'm on the phone all day long with people I've never met, don't know, and asking them to give me money, and I wasn't real successful at that. And something else happened there. Here's the difference between partisan politics and local politics.
Because the assembly is partisan, Republican, Democrat.
I had at the time the previous candidate was a woman named Roz McGrath, and at the time we were running, she had agreed not to run. She's not going to do that anymore. And we had an open primary. This was when Tony Strickland was our assembly member. And the old 37th was a pretty safe Republican district. Democrat was probably not going to win that district, no matter what.
What year?
This was 2000. This was the last time they had an open primary, by the way.
1998.
That was 98? No, it was 98, you're right.
That was our honeymoon.
Okay.
That was our honeymoon.
No, because 98 I was up for city at that point.
I remember.
Well, okay.
I take Beverly's word for it.
I'll take Beverly's word because, you see, that's why I'm retiring. So anyway, I got a visit there was a guy named Kevin Shelley who later became Secretary of State and then resigned rather than go to federal prison. Not one of my favorite characters in Democratic politics or in state politics in general. And I got a visit from one of his guys. And he wanted to talk to me, and I started telling him, well, this is what I'd like to do and all that. He says, oh, yeah, okay, fine. Who's your consultant? And I said, well, I talked to these consultants. They want $20,000 just to show up. I mean, I've got a clear primary field. I've worked as a promoter. My wife has taught the subject at the university level for 30 years. I don't think, at least for the primary, I don't think I'm going to hire a consultant. He says, oh, you have to hire a consultant. Well, see, I didn't hear that right. No, you have to hire a consultant. There was a list of 5 consultants, and you have to hire one of these guys, because if you do that, he gets a finder's fee. So I said, no, I didn't understand this at the time. I said, oh, no, I didn't see that. Okay, fine. And next thing I know, they came back and they gave Ross McGrath $100,000 in the primary and squashed me like a bug. So that was, do I regret that? Let's just say it wasn't the most pleasant experience, but I did learn something.
How about some questions from you? Yes, in the back. Yep.
I have a question. So we're coming up on the election for city council, and with your history, and this is just in your opinion, what qualities should we look for in a candidate that potentially could get into office for those of us that are getting ready to vote?
Aside from self-funding, somebody very wealthy.
Yeah. Actually, you don't need that much here. This is a personal contact kind of a place. The ability to learn is, I think, paramount. We hear this all the time. Oh, I've got business experience. I want to, come in and run this like a business. Well, if you are in fact a businessman or whatever, whatever your field is, if you're going to go into a completely new field, completely new endeavor, business field of area of business, really, wouldn't you take the time to learn about it? And that's that old story. Well, it's going to take you a couple of years just to find where the restrooms are. That's kind of true. Frank Schillo, our long ago county supervisor, a good friend, used to talk about the implementation barrier. I mean, everybody's got ideas, and believe me, no matter how clever you think you are, somebody's already thought of that. And you know, late John Vasconcellos used to say the right idea at the wrong time is the wrong idea. So I try very hard right now not to be the guy that says, oh, we tried that 10 years ago and it didn't work. Maybe it will work, but if you're coming onto the council, you have to figure out how to get that to happen. And when I first got elected, there was a guy, Alfonso Diaz, who was city council member in Santa Paula. He said, oh, yeah, you just got elected, huh? He said, don't worry, it's a very easy job. All you have to do is be able to count to 3. And that's the hard part.
5 votes on the council.
You know, you get 3 votes out of the 5 on the council. So how do you get those 3 votes? I mean, you know, there's people that come in and say, I'm going to bash you over the head until you vote for me. Or can you persuade someone to think you will? And you're not going to win every time. My goodness. You know, it didn't work this time. Okay, I didn't get the votes this time. Maybe next time. You know, but you can't hold. You know, in politics, you really. This is what's killing a lot of what's going on in this country right now. You can't hold a grudge because today's rival may be tomorrow's needed ally. You know, we may disagree on this issue, and we may, you know, it may get pretty ugly, but then something will come up next week, and you know, maybe we won't work together. So, I mean, there's that attitude, that willingness to work together, and you know, my goodness, you got a lot to learn. You know, you got a council agenda that's that thick. You get reports that are that thick, and you know, that's just for the city. And be engaged. Also, be engaged with the region. Regionalism is something we used to have. You know, guys in my cohort, Carl Morehouse and Neil Andrews of Ventura, those guys, and even Denny Gillette, over 1,000. There was a big belief in this. We can work together as a region, and we'll be better off. Now we get, oh, I don't care what happens over there. You know, I'm going to just, you know, take care of things here. But we can't afford that. We can't afford that. We need to think big. You know, why be afraid to think? You know, we're afraid to think big anymore. You know, you think about it. You know, oh, it's too hard, we can't do that, oh, it's too... No, I really hate, that's a no-can-do attitude I've always hated.
Other questions?
Yeah.
There is a second.
Is this thing we see today that you mentioned that I call democracy a temporary aberration in the evolution of our political system? Or is it something else that I wouldn't even have the slightest idea?
What we're working through is a change in communication. People communicate. You know, we were just talking about this a little bit before. You know, when I first came to this county, back 35 years, whatever it was, back in the early '80s, every community had a newspaper. We had the Oxnard Press Courier, Camarillo had a paper, Thousand Oaks had their own paper, Simi Valley had their paper. Ventura was a little bigger, but it was a Ventura paper. Ojai had weekly papers. People communicated that way. Now, okay, you're on Twitter, you're on social media. How do you sort this out? And I've noticed that there's a difference in the way people actually process words. You know, we can't even agree on what a word means anymore. And, you know, will that work out? I think it has to work out. Now the question is, how long is it going to take and how bad is it going to get? I really don't know. You know, you know, I think we need to get down to just taking care of business. And giving people credit for, there's, you know, I've been in a few congressional offices, and you know, it's a small sample, I admit, but there are people that will always, you know, make some kind of a joke about the other side. Oh, wow, those people there, you know, Elton used to talk about Lois Capps. Oh, well, she's a really good school nurse. You know, then there's other people who are trying to understand. Well, you know, the other side is thinking this, that, the other, and we really have to find a way to convince them. Well, we need more of that and less of the other thing. And you know, things have to get really bad before they get better. That's just the way the world works. Always has.
I'm still concerned about the future of water, source and water treatment in this used to lease the land, which we use Oxnard land for $1 a year. That lease expired. Oxnard wouldn't renew it for 10 years. Who knows how much we're paying now? I saw $1 million go over to Oxnard for Hueneme
Yeah.
a couple months ago. Who knows what that was for? And if the future of water source includes potable water, that location near their great facility is terrific.
Yeah, that money, and Oxford won't tell you this, but they forgot to send us the bill. They didn't want anybody to know that, so, but I just spilled the beans, so. But you're right, and yeah, I mean, you and I have talked about this before. I mean, there's no more important issue for this county right now. And Oxnard just got money to fix their wastewater plant, and all right, that needs to be done, but that's not enough. And I've been leaning on their council for a long time that we need to really get together and we need to build a new plant. We need to start thinking about recovering water rather than just treating it and dumping it out to the ocean. And there's not enough local money for that. It's going to have to come from the federal government, and we need to get our act together and do that. Now, you've got folks over in Oxnard that are fighting, the rate increases and all that. And I don't know what they're thinking, because we're gonna run up against it if we don't start start thinking in terms of reprocessing the water that we have and using the water that we have, and that's gonna, the plant in Oxnard, I don't know if any of you have seen it, it's literally falling down.
Just picture it back.
Yeah, and that's important for our city because that's where our wastewater goes. So I don't know. I've talked to Mayor Flynn. I'm trying to get a straight answer out of him now that you got the issue with the rates, and now they got the federal money, and what are they going to do with it? What does that mean for a future plan? They were all. Everybody, it's one of those things. We need. I've been trying to get a joint meeting together with the city councils and all that. I don't know right now where that stands. I mean, before the court ruling happened and before they got the federal money, everybody was interested in gung-ho, and now it's like, well, there's other things distracting their attention. But you're right. I mean, it really bugs me. It would be great if if I could get that rolling before I leave, but who knows?
I'm from the Midwest, but in the Mississippi River, 1,200 cities get all their water out of the river, dump, treat their sewage and dump it in. And 1 year, maybe 30 years ago, but New Orleans had the best water in the United States on the testing thing. That cost some money. Come down here, LA, second biggest city in the whole United States, and they do very little recycling the water. Like I said, they treat it, dump it in Malibu Bay, if it rains, everything's polluted, then the whole dang bay there.
Well, it's all about the money.
I know, but how do they get the money?
Well, it's because it was cheap. It was cheaper for LA to buy their water through their Department of Water and Power, and even now, with us, we have a couple sources locally, and it's still cheaper to do that than it is to build a reclamation plant. So but that's for today. I mean, Cayugas, who is our state provider, is actually looking at a seawater plant, which is going to take 15 years or so to build, and they figure by the time they get that done, maybe the price that delta will close, and it'll make economic sense at that point. But you got to think, that 15, 20 years in the future, we have to be, we're not thinking about that, and we're not thinking about that.
I know, but Oxnard, Ventura, all these places had, Santa Barbara too, they had, 10 years ago, they started solar energy, or not just solar, but recycling seawater, and they never completed the plants after spending a lot of money.
Well, Santa Barbara's back up now. Santa Barbara, that was 25, 30 years ago, they built that plant, and it didn't make economic sense. And they basically sold it off. And now, oh, well, we better start rebuilding it. Yeah, that's going to happen. It's just that it's so expensive, it's so energy intensive right now. It doesn't, compared to the water you can buy, it doesn't really make sense today. So, there again, how do you get people to think in the
Right.
future?
Question.
Yeah, I've changed my question about 3 times since,
Well, ask them all.
thank you for asking the water question, because was really important, and it kind of went to my question about this short-sightedness among elected officials. Is that something that's prevalent throughout our political arena, and how do we turn that around? How do we get people to think about, well, it's not going to affect me because I'll be dead by the time this happens, or by the time it gets bad enough? But how do we even get people to think beyond that what we're going to leave behind is important.
Yeah. And that's your job. It's, okay, we got, well, we get the next election. We got so much on our plate for this week. Oh, I don't have to worry about that, or that's somebody else's problem, or, that's where we get back to that regional issue. I mean, we've got, there's certain geographic facts. We have the Beach Erosion Authority, which exists because it's a system from point conception to point review. I mean, it all works together, and we ought to be looking at it together. Oxnard Plain, you look at the way the aquifers are. We all have our straws in the aquifer. We all ought to be planning together, and we're being forced to do that, by the way. But because we're being forced to do that, we ought to be thinking about how we're going to respond. And you may have read some of the economic literature about that's come out just recently about short-term planning versus long-term vision. It's so much easier to be caught up with what's right here that and you've got plenty of work to do right here, but you still have to keep your eye out there somewhere.
Well, and if you're only elected 4 years or 8 years, also there's no payoff in taking a hit now for something that will pay off for somebody else who's elected later on. So.
Wasn't there something years and years ago, because I came to the area in '68, but in the early '60s, they wanted to build a dam in the Sespe where they would reclaim and hold the water rather than go out to the ocean. And it was defeated by the Sierra Club. Did anybody ever go back and revisit that?
Well, you got Santa Felicia up there, Lake Piru, and the chances of damming Sespe are about zero.
This is back in the 60s.
Yeah, we've got, interestingly enough, the Freeman diversion, which was a big deal, 20 years ago too. That whole Santa Clara watersheds is really interesting because there's a fish component that has to be met. There's a lot we can do with capturing water. Now, we had a meeting here with the State Water Board a while ago. Rick Cole was still manager in Ventura. And there's a lot of discussion about new construction, about how you can save rainwater in new construction, but the fact is most of what we've got here has already been built. So, water rains out on the street, it washes down the storm drain, well, it disappears. It does nobody any good. There's parts of LA and San Fernando Valley where they're building these big permeable, so-called permeable areas where the water will seep in. And Callegas has been doing that up on Callegas Creek, putting water in the ground and things like that. You got when you look at storage, you got surface storage, which is ponds and reservoirs, but there's also subterranean. That there's aquifers in the ground, and we need to get water into those. So there's ever since I've been around, there's this big argument: do we build dams? Do we do conservation? Do we do subsurface storage? And I say, yeah, we do. We need to do all of it. And it just, we're arguing about tools, is what we're arguing about in many cases. And sometimes it's more appropriate. Sometimes, yeah, maybe you want to put a dam there, maybe you don't. But it depends on the circumstance, and it's, it's just so hard to think about, the future. It takes a lot of money. Nobody wants to pay. Who wants to pay for it? I want it for free.
there's the environmental issue too.
Sure, and that was, the old Bay Delta project, which was a big, big deal. Everybody got together and shook hands, we're all gonna get better together. Well, then the federal government didn't send any money, and then all of a sudden we're fighting each other again, so, what I always say about engineering problems, the great thing about an engineering problem, if you have enough time and enough money, you can solve it. If you're short of time or you're short of money, you got a problem. These things aren't cheap.
Well, it gets tied up in court too.
Yeah, well, yeah.
And there's where your money goes.
There you go. Yeah, it's Governor Brown says CEQA reform is doing God's work, and I was a big fan of the California Environmental Quality Act, but it can any good law can be misused.
We like to say all thumbs and no fingers. It's a very blunt instrument, one you need it. Yeah, final question, and I don't know where we are on time.
We're fine, we've got
Okay.
51 minutes.
I just wanted to say to Councilman Sharkey, thank you for your service, and please don't go too far, because we don't want to lose your institutional knowledge. All the history that you have is vital. I mean, how are we going to not repeat the same mistakes unless we learn from those who came before us, right? And-
Well, thanks.
Yeah. And then, yeah, thank you. And then I wanted to push back a little on that ego-driven characteristic among politicians. Do you find the same thing among women, or is it generally
That's a
found
very
among-
big
found
question.
among men? I mean, the reason women politicians used to say it was less ego-driven and more
Well,
than men?
well, it should all be service driven, and
Right.
and are there personality differences between men and women? I don't really think there. It's you have to have this odd combination of ego and humility, and you've got to find out who you are. You can't, okay, believe it or not, I'm a pretty shy guy. I mean, I really don't like asking people for things. I don't like really knocking on doors, but at some point I say, okay, I will put on this persona of a politician and I will do what I need to do. Fake it till you make it. But you can't be something you're not, because people are going to see that eventually. It's it's going to come out even at this level where basically nobody knows who we are. To be honest with you, I had this conversation with Manny Lopez years ago. Oh, you're in the grocery store and somebody comes up. Oh, everybody knows who I am. No, there's 200 other people there. Don't have a clue. So don't take yourself too seriously. But at the same time, there are people that are watching you. And John Longville was, sort of a mentor to me. He was in the assembly from San Bernardino, and he said it was a particularly hard time. And he says, don't lose faith, because there are people unknown to you who are watching you and taking inspiration from your actions. So. I mean, you gotta be your best self, and the trick is always ask for someone's vote. Can I have your vote? Tip O'Neill one time, his neighbor lady didn't vote for him. She said, why? She said, well, you never asked for my vote. So yeah, it's still about personal contact. It's still about knowing people and getting to understand you and trying to understand them and having enough trust for each other.
Thank you again.
Sort of follow that. Is it harder for women, entering politics? And this is a period which historically we're going to look back as a real hinge period of women coming into their own in American politics. But there's something about a skill set that certain people can bring to the political arena that works or is irrelevant. And for instance, we talked earlier about if you're a good businessman, does that mean that you're going to be a good politician? Not necessarily. A lot of it is a different skill set, marked, for instance, by the fact that working in politics, bring it back to what John was just saying, the big difference between the private sector and the public sector is the public sector, you're in a fishbowl. And the news media and other people are looking at you all the time, and you can get away with an awful lot of things in private industry and operating that just fall apart. And I think you have kind of a national, example of that, no matter which way you feel politically. But there's one skill set that you developed that doesn't work terribly well in a public arena where expectations are far different. Now, with men and women, women have been socialized in many ways to play the game slightly differently than men, and that can be an advantage or a disadvantage. But just because they're a woman doesn't mean that that skill set is immediately transferable. We're just in a period of huge change. Right now it favors very much bringing women in, and we'll see where all that goes. I mean, we're going to be best off, as moral lead from Martin Luther King, when you're looked at for your character, not for the color of your skin, or that I think ought to apply to gender as well. Let's finish it up. John, what last kind of advice would you have to people?
One less? No one to shut up.
The point at which there's a chance you get into the newspapers. What would you want to be your farewell or?
Oh.
It's been fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or what?
That's a tough one, and I think back to, I look back and, could I have done more? Sure. I mean, I'm fundamentally a very lazy guy. But, there's a Reggie, I'm a baseball fan, by the way, if you haven't noticed. There's a Reggie Jackson quote, I think, that kind of applies. And they said, well, how do you want to be remembered? He says, I want to be remembered as a guy that every time he stepped on the field gave you everything he had. Some days it was great. Some days it was crap. But whatever you got that day was what I had. And, that's a good thing to keep in mind. I started this, I said, maybe I only get 4 years. Let's make it a good 4 years. And, so there's so much you can do, and there's so much that needs to be done, and no one of us can do it all. But we try to pick up our little corner of the weight and try and lift it and try to move it forward. Hopefully we moved in the direction of progress. Yeah.
Okay.